Okay, hello everyone. Um, I'd like to go ahead and just briefly go around and do introductions. Some of us might know each other, but others wouldn't. I see Amy's joined us from Wisconsin, where it looks colder than it is here, based on that sweater. Yeah, for instance. So hello, my name is Mike Voliniak. I'm here in Virginia at Hampton Sydney College. I have been the chair of the steering committee for Palm since its inception, and I've done a lot of active learning techniques, both inside and outside this particular group. So let's go around. Catherine, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I am in a bit of a transition right now. I'm actually currently teaching at the College of St. Benedict, St. John's University, which is a small private college in Minnesota. However, I will actually be starting a new job at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, Monday.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
Yes, I think probably so through their biology teaching and learning department. So I have to imagine that my work and experience in Palm has probably benefited me in terms of that transition and move there. So I'm excited.
For sure. What are you actually going to do? Like, what's the job?
Yeah, so it's a joint position between the Biology Teaching and Learning Department and the Biotechnology Institute. Mm-hmm. And the first part is there's a company called Takeda, which is a biotherapeutic company, and they want people to come in, design, implement, execute, assess sort of a series of, you could kind of think of it as continuing education for their employees. So that will be the first step, and then that will get migrated. I'll bring that into the graduate program at the University of Minnesota.
Nice.
And then presumably after that kind of gets up and running, the possibility of just becoming more regular teaching, not related to companies and whatnot. So We'll kind of see that, but that'll be several years down the road because the grant with Takeda is for a couple of years, and then I have to migrate it to the graduate program. So
lots of change of pace, though. That's awesome.
It is. Yeah. Yes, it is.
Kim, let's hear from you next.
All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Kim. I am in Southern California right now.
Nice.
So it's in the afternoon, but I just came back from Australia, so I'm a little bit jet lagged. That's why I'm kind of like just taking it easy. Currently, I am teaching at Mount San Antonio College. It's a community college in Los Angeles.
Cool.
I am on break, so I don't start my spring semester until last week in February. So I have a few more weeks to go.
When do you end?
Middle of June.
Okay, so there is a trade-off there. I was like, my God. Well, welcome. Alex?
Okay, hi everyone. Am I coming through with audio?
You are.
Great. So my name's Alex. I teach at Stanford University now, and I'm involved in upper division lab courses that are very inquiry-based. But I've also had a lot of experience with kind of intro-level general biology courses as well.
Great. And Amy?
So I'm Amy Pernuski. I'm one of the members of the steering committee and go way back with Mike on all these mentoring and teaching programs. I've taught at the community college level. I actually previously was at the University of Minnesota Medical School. I was up in Duluth, but I actually was involved with some of the teaching fellowship programs for new faculty while I was up there. And now I'm in Wisconsin at a new regional campus medical school. And so I've been involved in reviewing a lot of the Palm applications, but I'm really excited to finally put some faces with the names and have a chance to connect with you all.
Good. And I think this might be the first journal club I've ever been in where I'm the only person in the Eastern time zone. That's just a fun fact. It's this later time does seem to be a good idea. We have two Pacificers on here and 2 Centrals and me. I'm slogging through 5 p.m. here, but it's worth it if we get new people. So before we get into the paper itself, do people have some, well, Catherine has shared her update and it's giant, but other maybe less dramatic updates about particular classes that may be working on projects related to active learning, things like that. Hearing none.
Well, I actually, so I designed a series of learning modules related to direct-to-consumer genetic testing and a bunch of issues with that for a genetics course, and I was able to do them for the first time at the end of last semester, so in December. So that was really fun. And then I am in the process then of looking at the formative and summative assessment data in order to make some changes probably to how things exactly designed and went for not me, because now I won't be there, but one of my colleagues who will be teaching that genetics course this spring has agreed to do it again. And so it won't actually be me doing it, but I mean, since the goal is to produce materials that are useful to others, it still seems like it's relevant to try and do that. So
cool. Now, was that class for majors, or is it more of a non-majors class? It sounds like it's a more issue-based thing you're talking about if it's the direct-to-consumer test.
Yeah, it's our one of our upper division courses in our biology. So yeah, it would be for majors, bio majors, biochemistry. Cool. Those types of people usually take that course.
Very cool.
Actually, I'm curious what the direct-to-consumer tests you were looking at.
So I designed it mostly around the 23andMe system because I was able to they have sample tests or sample results, I should say, that you can access. So I was able to access like what looks like an actual report. And then I built sort of a story around this person, and they were supposed to be the healthcare provider, right? So this patient comes in with their 23andMe results and basically is like, what does this mean? Am I going to have Parkinson's? You know? And so it's designed as like, that's sort of the interest grab and sort of the central piece over several class periods. But we do talk about things like representation in the genome-wide association studies that these are based on, and those types of things. So we kind of go out and do more than just interpreting the genetic tests. We think about it from a bigger picture too, but kind of all centered around this patient that they're supposed to be talking to.
I think I would also mention something that I've been working on. I teach our introductory bio class on a regular basis, but usually what I do is I have the students pick some kind of popular article, not scientific article. The class is some majors, some non-majors, they're all together. I like to sort of defer some of the activities towards the non-majors portion of the class, simply to keep everybody with different interest and ability levels on the same plane. And people who are interested in being majors, I work with them to sort of get them involved, get their beak wet in the field, things like that. My class was bigger than normal this semester, so I found that to do that same activity would be very cumbersome, if not impossible. So I'm trying something different this semester, once a week, so it's a 3-day week class. Do things more traditionally Monday, Wednesday, and then try something activity-focused Friday based on what we've done the previous 2 classes. There's nothing particularly revolutionary about this, but it's just something I've never tried before in that class. And one of the things I've been inspired by hearing other people talk was doing things that were low stakes, held at a regular basis, and allowed people to work both themselves and in small groups on things. And so my sample size is 1, so I don't have a lot to go on yet. But as I keep doing this, I'm tentatively excited that it will be something that will help that class a lot. Frankly, I've enjoyed it a little bit more than hearing, you hear about the same 5 or 6 popular topics when you do the articles every single time. So I'm cautiously optimistic that will work, but stay tuned and we'll find out. Dee, you've joined us since we began. If you want to briefly introduce yourself, maybe mention things going on with relation to POM or active learning in general with you. Or not. Dee, can you hear us? Okay, well, we'll come back.
Meanwhile, I can share.
Please, yes.
So I did flip teaching with my
Oh, Kim, I think your microphone is cut out.
kind of took on a new job.
Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me?
I can now, yeah.
Okay, all right. But this year I took on a new job at my campus. I'm an outcomes coordinator, so I'm looking at the general campus in terms of how we're assessing outcomes, student learning outcomes, and doing a lot more with accreditation for our campus. But meanwhile, though, I have taken what I've learned with active learning and what I have gained through POM, and I have shared it with my colleagues. So we started a little learning community with 6 people. A couple of them are full-time, and amazingly, we had about 4 adjuncts, part-timer, that have been joining our weekly active learning circles to talk about different pedagogies. And I share some of the articles that I've picked up from you guys, from POM with them. So we have a combination of journal club, combination of discussion of what works in the classroom, and everything that I've learned I pass along. So that was all last semester, and they were very appreciative. They look forward to continuing it, but I just don't have the time this semester because of the new position.
Sure. That sounds cool. Everyone's doing different things. This is neat. Okay, thank you guys for sharing. And let's go ahead and transition to the chapter. And this is something that Sue Wick had suggested for us. And I can see why she did. Just looking at the editorial board in the front page, the fairly intimidating list of heavy hitters in our field here. And looking at the topic is sort of an inversion of what we normally talk about. We like to talk about success, and this particular paper seems to deal in failure. And the idea of what one can do to improve active learning, which is certainly what we're trying to do, but then how do we avoid some of the common and not so common pitfalls that comes in a conversion such as this. Like I know, Kim, you mentioned a flipped classroom, which is one of the more substantial changes you can make, but even any alteration that would take your classroom from traditional to more fluid with respect to an active learning environment. So I think I'd like to start with just general assessment comments. What did people find particularly striking in this work that we should probably be talking about?
Oh, I'll go.
Go for it.
Yeah, I found the whole article to be very useful, and I wish I had read it earlier so I could share it with my colleagues. It pretty much hit all the main points that I've experienced personally when we went through this. And I appreciate the comments toward the end about, solutions as to how to address some of these barriers. So I thought it's a very useful article, and especially the part about the different type of mindset for the faculty member.
Totally.
If the faculty member is more of a sage on the stage where I got to tell them everything versus, no, I'm more relaxed and I can facilitate and not have to say everything. I think that is a critical point because I see it in myself and as well as other faculty members. And if we are adamant about, no, I got to do all the talking, well, then there goes your opportunity to do active learning, seems like.
Yeah, I find myself doing a really good job in like some of my courses on being really the facilitator role model. And then sometimes in other courses where I feel like I've got all of the stuff to get through, all of a sudden I can find myself defaulting into well, it's just faster to lecture. I got to cover all of this stuff. And so reading that section on there, I was like, but I don't have to cover all of the stuff in the classroom if I'm designing, effective preparatory and activities and stuff for them to practice the stuff that I don't specifically address. And so it's funny, right? Because it's like I hold the core belief that I should be a facilitator role model, but just sometimes that default, because it's what we've all been exposed to more, was overriding it. So it was really sort of impactful for me.
Yeah, I mean, I was drawn, just like you guys. There's that summary chart on the 8th page, the unsuccessful and successful faculty core beliefs, which I think very nicely summarizes what you guys are getting at. The idea, just looking at the unsuccessful, must convey content, is authority, learning equals facts and methods. And I think you've drawn that out well. The idea of, one of you said, I think, Captain, you said stage on a stage, right? The idea of content conveyance as central to what our job is. And the idea of facilitator, as we've all seen, is a difficult one. It's a difficult transition, especially when we've been brought up in this notion that we are the experts and our job is to get that expertise out as well as we can. And sort of the fear, I guess, that can come with surrendering that and relying on the students to do, as it says there in the chart as well, your own independent learning. So I also appreciate in the bottom here too the notion of what we classify as assessment, the idea of rote memorization versus more sort of experiential based opportunities. And that doesn't, not to say that there's not a place for memorizing stuff. I mean, there are certain things that are non-negotiable when it comes to needing to learn, but the idea of being able to bring in a more diverse array of things to do. And later on in this paper, they do address sort of grading schemes that tackle that, like different ways you can look at stuff. But just that idea of having a more diverse set of assessments, I find an attractive model as well.
Yeah, I did think the grading scheme point was interesting. And, that's something I've been struggling with, is because I want my students to be internally motivated to do stuff. And again, now that I'm working predominantly with medical students, you feel like at some point they should be making that transition. But again, we've definitely selected for the ones that are very sort of grade and point oriented. And it's amazing how, the little point structure really does drive a lot of behaviors. So, I thought that was interesting how they acknowledge that in there. And I think that is something important to think about, how you can incentivize some of those behaviors, because really this is like a whole culture change you need to support them in. And, again, some of that comes from how you set up your classroom, but even just making it an acceptable environment for them to make mistakes and, be open to sharing and things like that, or otherwise you won't be successful.
And I was actually just going to ask you, and you brought it up yourself, being at a more medical school oriented environment as opposed to undergraduate environments, did you find any of these things have changed somewhat or more or less applicable than previous things you've done, or do the trends tend to stay the same at a different level?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting that I'm dealing with now, and I don't know if any of you are having to deal with this environment, but again, I think this is part of how education is going, as I'm dealing with more and more having to do active learning in distance learning environments. So our content will sometimes be coming out of Milwaukee, which is like 3 hours away from us, and then they're expecting the students to, you know, be having small group discussion up here. And again, if you don't have a facilitator or somebody there, you know, that's trained to help promote some of those discussions and give the students feedback, it really does not work that well. And even like, we do a lot where it's like we put on timers and we're cutting in and out, but you know, that just really disrupts the flow of conversation and things like that too. I've also been trying to do more discussion boards lately. And so, you know, something that I've been interested in, and I definitely don't have sort of the magic secret, is how in more of these online virtual environments can you be, you know, inclusive in doing active learning.
Yeah, I also, to go back to that grading scheme, I thought that was really interesting. One of the things that had me thinking about, though, is for those courses with multiple sections of which you're not always in control of the sort of mandated grading scheme. I was sort of thinking about like, well, how do you sort of game your own system for that the faculty are required to do? And I was thinking about for my introductory biology course, I do try to emphasize like the sort of growth mindset, not yet type of idea. I would never be allowed to do option 2 in that type of course. But I have done in the past, and I'm wondering if I could just restructure it a little bit, where like after the first exam, I give them this, it's an inventory where they have to go through every question they got wrong, and it asks them sort of like, why did you get it wrong? And so for multiple choice questions, it'll say, you know, like, I just didn't know it, or I got confused by the question, or I didn't have enough time. So it asks them to sort of stop and think. And then they also have to identify their resources. So what has been provided to them that could help them better understand that material. And then I've had them, once they've sort of completed this inventory, they have to meet with either me or the TA. And there's a couple of reflection questions in there, you know, like what patterns did you notice in the questions you got wrong? Or what changes would you make to your studying to address these issues? And so then they go through those reflection questions, not the whole giant inventory unless they want to, but just the reflection questions. And then they've been able to sort of earn some points back on the exam. And so with the goal being that they don't just shove their exam in their backpack to never be looked at again. And so I'm sort of maybe think about like those courses where you don't have an option 2, but what can you do to maybe have a modified option 2, or maybe option 3, that's what you might call it.
Well, I appreciate the metacognitive component you throw in there too, right? The notion of making them think about how they're studying and hopefully over maybe a longer term, understand how to modify how they study to maximize their success. So that's a neat thing you do in there.
Yeah. There's actually a really great blog by some learning psychologists. I think they call them, I'm just Googling it to make sure I'm not making something up. They're called the learning scientists. And they do some really great, they have really great resources that are short and very pointed and very like, this is what you could do. These are different study strategies and this is why it works. And they have links to other research that I've used before as well, in terms of, you know, they talked about teaching your students how to study. So I've used their work before as well. I got one of my psychology colleagues turned me on to them.
So another...
Catherine, I'm sorry. Catherine, you said that the learning scientists, so you said?
Yeah. Here, let me pull the link up and I can put it in the chats thing.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. So another significant portion of this that's probably useful to bring up is the idea of the role of your administration and the benefits or detractions that your administration may provide with respect to active learning implementation. I know we here in Palm have actually dealt with a couple specific cases, and thank you, Catherine. You'll find the link in the chat there now. Specific cases where people have very excitedly done reform, be it activity-based classes, be it flipped classes, things like that, to then find out that their administrators are somewhat horrified by what they've done and really wish they would stop. And so I think this is something that's a useful aspect of this particular course, or this particular article, with respect to thinking about what you can and cannot do. If you're at an institute, well, even small institutions where you don't necessarily have total control over a course, do you have to coordinate what the things are happening in a class across multiple sections? And if so, what kind of buy-in do you need from your chair, your colleagues, things like that? What can you and can you not get away with changing, basically? And so I was wondering if people had a sense of, do they feel inhibited sometimes in what they can do, or is it more of a free reign in being able to change things? And I realize that's sort of a binary choice I'm giving you. It doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other, but just your experiences with that.
This came up when I started the learning group, last semester with some of my colleagues.
Sure.
And knowing that 4 of them were part-timers, and they were very concerned about student evaluations and how their own observation, evaluation would reflect if they were to do active learning, especially when the evaluator is not a fan of active learning. So I went straight to my dean, who is our boss, and I explained what is I'm trying to do. And fortunately, he was supportive. He said, yes, I understand that trying new things may not always work out, and it could backfire with poor evaluation from students and as well as the other people, the peer. So he's willing to overlook it if that was the only, item on the ticket. So I was able to have him come to our department meeting and share that with all of us. So it was in the department minutes so that our part-time faculty felt somewhat protected and allowed them to implement some of the active learning strategies and not be fearful of any repercussions.
That sounds awesome. Not everyone gets that kind of progressive support there. That's excellent. And you do bring up a really important point there with respect to the student evaluation portion of the program. And do you have sort of an understanding when you go into what you're doing that you could in fact see student eval negativity that would need to be not addressed, but prepared for, if you will?
I guess one question I have kind of building off of that is how actively do people take student feedback, and do you feel like you've gotten reliable or helpful feedback from student before on your activities? I know it's always difficult usually when you first look at the feedback, and if there's anything negative, you dwell on that, even if there's a lot of good stuff in there. I mean, usually then I need a colleague or somebody to sort of fully talk through it, and then there's usually some grain of truth or learning in there, but I'm just sort of curious what other people's experiences have been with student feedback on active learning.
Go ahead, Kim.
Okay. When I tried flip teaching, of course, initially students came thinking, I'm just going to sit here and have you tell me what I need to know. So it took a lot of convincing. My mentor calls it, yeah, you got to get them to buy in on this, otherwise it's not going to work. And I think it, for a community college student, it takes a lot more buy-in, because they are coming from, multiple jobs. This is just a class that they take part-time.
Right.
They have family issues. So the diversity of students is huge. And that goes along with their preparation and their time at home to study outside. So it took a lot of convincing, and I don't think I fully convinced every student that this is the way to go. Fortunately, I'm tenured, so regardless of how much they complain, I can say, well, I'm doing what I'm doing because it's for your best, for your best learning result. Some of it did, some of them did buy in, and some of them did appreciate the effort. But yeah, it was continue, and the initial, message had to be in the very beginning, had to be day one, because in my PALM project, I started implementing just part of the flipped teaching method halfway through the semester, and that was a disaster. They came in, just sitting there watching me lecture, and then suddenly I said, hey, no, next week we're going to do something different. And I think they pretty much would have killed me if they could. So I learned from that lesson, and the following semester, I started day one saying, nope, it's going to be different, it's going to be flipped, and this is how it's going to be. So there was better acceptance, because they didn't know what lecturing was about with me. So I think starting in the very beginning, day one, and then just keeping it continual reinforcement is the best way to go for the buy-ins.
I like that you bring in the whole almost disclaimer idea at the beginning, because I too have seen the value in having them know what you're up to right out of the gate. That idea of the student buy into the system. So you sort of defray that critique that's very easy to come by, that we're foregoing our job, our responsibilities, when we actually make them do some of their own independent learning. So I have heard and have seen exactly what you're describing, the importance of bringing the students into your scheme, having them understand why you're doing what you're doing. So I definitely respect that.
I think that I'm sitting in well, I guess I won't be sitting there much longer, but I was sitting in a pretty good position the last few years. I have a very traditional student body in that they're 18 to 22, and they live on campus, and all of those more traditional characteristics. I took over, I've been doing a lot more mentoring of new faculty in the last 4 or 5 years. This is, I've been teaching now for 9 years. And so I think I'm creating sort of a critical mass of people that are not, they're not necessarily teaching the exact same way I would, but they're not just doing the straight up lecture either. Sure. So they're finding their own pathway. But so I think that that's helpful, because, for example, when we teach introductory biology and there's 14 separate sections, like I'm not the only one teaching this way. Yeah. So I've noticed in the last handful of years that I don't know that I really get a lot of pushback anymore on my particular style. Not to say that everybody's like, she's the best or anything by any means, but I don't think it's necessarily just a pushback on the act of learning. In fact, I am also doing research related to inclusivity in our Biology 101 course. And so I have the opportunity to read student comments from all the sections, not the instructor feedback. This is a separate survey that they take. And a number of them are saying, like, I wish that I had gotten the materials from these other classes. I wish that I had had those opportunities. Or, you know, sometimes straight up being like, I just used my friend's materials and things, that resources that they had. And I also our A&P department, and we have a huge pre-health group of students.
Yeah.
And so they're always, even though they don't take it till their last year, they're always so focused on the A&P, and they're mostly active learning professors. And so I think that they're just like, well, better get used to it. So I was saying there was a lot more pushback in my first couple of years, but I think with some faculty turnover and some change in sort of the departmental culture, it's generally improving in what students sort of expect. So
Awesome.
At least where I have been.
Yeah, and I would say with the student, the students appreciating what you do, I feel like every year you kind of have a better way of delivering it. You can design your active learning to really fit the level. I feel like when we're thinking about looking at student evaluations, I was just at a really nice qualitative evaluation session, which had a suggestion of kind of cutting your feedback, saying, okay, of the students who gave the course ranking kind of in the bottom 20th percentile, what did they think about the active learning? You know, and I guess my biggest concern is, do I give enough time for my activities? And I think that was a really good way to see, you know, am I asking too much? And I mean, the biggest thing is I don't want to frustrate the students with the activities I have and say, okay, this was set too high, and turn certain students off.
And in both your cases, that you're able maybe to convey the model to your colleagues, you know, through persistence, through them seeing the stuff that you're doing. I sort of get a sense of that as you're describing it, which is great. One of the things that we sort of, definitely said we would do as an organization is train up people in mentorships, and then you guys become mentors yourselves in one way or another. So the other big thing in this paper, or less to say but still important, was talking about physical setting. I know we sort of alluded to that before when Amy mentioned the distance learning. The idea of being stuck in a classroom that doesn't necessarily have the infrastructure or ideal furniture, configurations, things like that to do this kind of work. Certainly I've been in situations where I've been in more of a lecture hall setting and people are craning their necks around to talk to people on another, you know, level, literally, to do group work and things like that. So, Amy, do you guys have a classroom? I mean, if you're communicating with people in Milwaukee, that's set up sort of like the active learning classrooms you have at the University of Minnesota, or is it a?
Yeah, well, we've got more movable tables that then are set up in pods, but that was a big fight to make sure that we could have the classroom in pods because people wanted it in rows, but yeah. so again, I think that's something you're always kind of having to work through, is getting the setup. And part of it is the tables are like connected with microphones. So then like, that's why they didn't want us moving it back and forth in different configurations. But we just got some new space and it's set up really nicely for active learning. So if you all ever have the opportunity to help design space, I think, you know, again, if you can help make sure that the new settings are really conducive to that. And I mean, when we lobbied, the University of Minnesota has a ton of great active learning classrooms. And, you know, once we got one in place, everybody was wanting to book it and use it for different things. I think one other interesting thing that ties in with that is kind of the group size and how big those tables are. Right now it's pretty nice. We've got, like my total class, even with medical students, is only 20 to 25. And, you know, we've got like groups of 5, but occasionally I've been down in Milwaukee where they have 200 students in their active learning classroom. And I mean, it's just like a sea of tables. So, you know, being able to really get around that classroom and have that connection with that many students. And then, you know, and then we're on the TV screen that they're supposed to be connecting, you know, with the distance people, as well as having 200 people in the room. So I think, again, the number of people you're trying to manage really does make a difference. And then knowing kind of how best to group them. I mean, I think definitely, group size more in like the 5 to 6 is ideal, but sometimes just because of practical constraints, they start, getting to be 8 or higher. And I think then, making sure everybody's participating definitely gets more challenging.
Right. Which is what made me change what I was doing this year, precisely what you're describing, that the groups were going to get so unwieldy that maintaining my original class scheme was going to be really unwieldy. And so necessity being mother of invention, I'm now doing other stuff. Dee, can you hear us? Because we can finally see you.
Yeah, I was actually in the car on the way.
Oh, all right.
Rush hour, so I've been able to listen, but I couldn't talk back. So.
Well, good to see you.
No, I've enjoyed hearing the feedback and appreciate knowing that things rang true for you all.
Yeah.
But part of the reason actually for the chapter came from my frustration at the medical school. Is it Kat? Who's at the medical school? Amy?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with your textbook, so.
Well, they said they wanted flipped classroom, and then they wouldn't let me do any of the things that were needed, such as require a pretest before the students came to class. I went, oh no, they're grown-ups. They can do it if they, we'll put it out there, but we can't make them do it. And then don't do it, then they come to class, then they don't know what's happening, then they get frustrated, then they stop coming to class because they don't understand what's going on. It was a beautiful example of when these things don't work.
Yeah. Okay. Other sort of summary thoughts about the work?
I mean, one thing I appreciated is the emphasis that the active learning should also be reflected in the summative assessments. And I find that's quite challenging. Well, I mean, depending on your TA grading help, is how do you kind of also have questions that match what you can do in the classroom in those groups. And I guess I recognize it doesn't have to be the entire exam, but I guess I really like this idea where you take a question that people have worked on in groups and either just put it back on there in the exam or have a slightly, tweaked version of that, just so they get that reward of, okay, we've seen this, we've worked on this before, and now this is really going to be reflected in the big stakes exam towards the end.
Yeah, it's critical. We had an anatomy instructor who wanted to teach the way I did, and he came and watched my classes, and he set them up, and then partway through we realized from student complaints that it just was a disaster. And so our science ed graduate student, Patty Thorne, that was working with me on this, sat in on the class, and she said, it took me a while, but she figured out what he was doing wrong. And then part of it was he was expecting them to do this active learning in class, and then the tests were who memorized the most tiny points in the facts.
Yeah.
And so they stopped paying attention to what was going on in class. It was, hey, what are you doing Saturday night, instead of talking about the problem.
Definitely been there.
Especially that little time period between the end of spring break and the end of the semester, which for my school is not that long. And it's no, but really you do have a couple more weeks left. Focus up. Yeah. But I just made a note. I like that idea of kind of pulling something almost word for word off of. So I give a lot of paper. I probably killed so many trees. It's terrible. But I give them a lot of worksheets, and I tell them, these are your opportunities to practice. And I also tell them we are never going to get through all of it during class. But these are things that you can work on outside of the classroom. And so I think it would be really kind of made a note as I'm coming up on my first exam to maybe pull a question from the worksheet that I know we didn't get to in class. They have a key, so they can still see it, and of course office hours and everything, and pull a question out of there, and then when we turn the exam back, kind of point out how this material is coming from the resources they've been provided, to really kind of emphasize that.
I think that's a really good idea. To get my students to read before class, I give them a list of what I call reading questions, they're pages, and it's like list, describe, define, etc. And we generally don't talk about those in class, but I always make sure I test a significant number of those on the test, so that they know, yeah, you were supposed to have learned the definitions for these things.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'm going to go ahead and close us out here, but this has been fun. Thank you guys for all being here today. And I always remind people, if you have particular topics or papers you'd like us to do not hesitate to contact us, and we will schedule them. We actually got some valuable feedback at our last group meeting at the American Society for Cell Biology meeting in DC last December, that people definitely would enjoy some more topic-based discussions. And so we're definitely happy to try to do that. All right.
Sure.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.